American exceptionalism. Some people believe it, some people don't. But what does American exceptionalism mean? The goal of my journey is to get past the buzzword and explore, what does American exceptionalism really mean? I'm Janine Turner. Join me as I speak with scholars and Americans all across the United States about what American exceptionalism means to them, both historically and currently. American exceptionalism, how and why it matters.
American exceptionalism, it's an expression about the aspects of our country that are good, special, unique. One aspect of America that is exceptional is our national public school system based on a federalism structure. In fact, the first American public school was founded in Boston, Massachusetts. The Boston Latin School, founded in 1635. Today, in Boston, Massachusetts, I speak with an exceptional teacher, person, and American, David Edelman. David is a teacher at the same public school from where his grandmother graduated in 1932, Union Square Academy for Health Sciences in New York City. We have an enlightening conversation about Americans' shared cultures, our United States Constitution, the vital impact and influence and responsibility of teachers, the richness of civic service, community, and benevolence, all aspects of American exceptionalism.
David, I'm so excited you're here with us. You have flown in from New York. We're in Boston, and you flew in from New York.
It was a very short flight.
Yeah, I know. It's like one of the
Shortest
flight
flight ever.
But I'm thrilled that you did because I'm a huge admirer of yours. We've had a connection with our love of education and the Constitution and things of that nature. You have such a rich history as well. And I said, do you think David would fly in? So thank you for flying in today for this interview.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I mean, the last time that we talked was during the pandemic, during virtual learning.
Yes.
Where, you were speaking to my students, like, right after Constitution Day, so that was great.
Yes, that was fun. So, all right, so we want to talk about American exceptionalism, how and why it matters, and how are we, and why does it matter, and why is it important? Because there are 50% of America that really think we are, and 50% that don't, and so it's like, well, let's just explore. And so, where would you like to start? I know that you have an exceptional background with your heredity and traveling and moving to this country. So, would you like to start with that?
I can.
Well, you don't have to.
I mean, I thought perhaps I can share a little bit about what I thought, American exceptionalism meant to me.
Yeah, well, we kind of weave that in.
Okay.
But I mean,
like my personal story.
Well, if you don't want to talk about this all, we can cut all this out.
No, we could. That's fine.
Your grandfather came over and. Right?
Yeah,
so, you don't have to talk about that.
Yeah, no. I'd love to. I mean, one of my favorite stories that I tell students, usually on the first day of school, after I expose them to the history of our school, which is unique because the school building that I teach in opened in 1913, and at the time it was the tallest and the largest and the most populated all-girls high school in the country. And it was founded to do two things: to train young girls vocationally so they can earn money for themselves and their families. And the second was a real focus, and they would use the term at the time, on patriotism. They would also use the term civics and civic engagement. And it's really been amazing to kind of look at some of the artifacts in our school and to look at these things.
That's a fabulous history because now women couldn't even vote then.
So I share with students that when the school first opened, that women did not have the right to vote all across the country. But not ironically, because there's people derive power from many ways. The school was actually first founded based upon student-led protests in front of the Board of Education. And so that was in 1909. And we have a poster, actually. One poster remaining We have like 90% of the poster, not the whole poster, but you can read the language and it's like really antiquated, but it's like, oh, please, 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 men in the important room, like waste no more time, like break ground on this school. And it was actually a student-led protest that led to the creation of our school.
For women.
Yeah,
So were the women protesting to have a school?
Yes, exactly. And you can see in the image of these schoolgirls in their school outfits, bows in their hair with their hands outstretched, trying to like influence the men in the room that would ultimately make the decision. So it's interesting to contemplate that. It's also really remarkable that our school, I think, is perhaps the first school in the country to have a documented student government. We have like a school handbook that was printed in 1913 that outlines student government and how it functions and the purpose of it. So really civics and student activism permeated our school from the very beginning. And it's interesting because I think I do some really exceptional things with my students, and I think that America is moving in the right direction in terms of taking up civic engagement as like a pillar to schooling. I think that's really important. But I derive so much motivation and inspiration from looking at what my school did 100 years ago. Because even though I think like the things that we're doing now are great, meaningful, and innovative, when I see what students were doing when the school first opened, it really blows my mind. And I think it helps us reconnect with our roots and the purpose of public schooling.
So I just think that's amazing that there's a school founded on civics and the Constitution and the founding documents, as well as activism, that seems to be missing in a lot of schools.
We think of that today, but that was the norm.
Uh-huh. But now it's the exception.
That was the premise of schools. Like public schooling the purpose of public schooling was to build like a shared culture, shared appreciation. And the thing is, my school has always been a school to immigrants. Like the populations of immigrants have changed. And so it's really remarkable. Like we have yearbooks going back from 1913 to the present and looking at, who are the students that have attended our school over the
And where is the school?
Plus, it's right 2 blocks from Union Square in Manhattan on 14th Street.
Okay.
On Irving Place, hence Washington Irving High School. Mm-hmm. And just to like see how the how the demographics have changed, with an understanding of, this school has always served an immigrant population, just different immigrants.
Right.
And so then after I tell my students a little bit about the history of this school, which most of them are completely unfamiliar with, I tell them that, one of the reasons why this resonates with me so much is because my grandmother graduated from this school.
Oh, that's great.
So my grandmother graduated from Washington Irving High School in 1935, and then I show them this photo, which is her graduation photo.
That's awesome.
So
may I see it close
yeah,
up?
that's Anna Herbstman.
She looks, how old was she here?
She must have been 18.
18.
Yeah.
Wow, she's beautiful and elegant. Look at her.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that students can also relate to because, my students are going to graduate in a few weeks from now.
1935.
Right? And so that was always a thing. There's a lot of commonalities in the school experience, which is wonderful to have those shared traditions.
Is it still a girls' school?
No.
Okay.
So, and that's a government lesson in itself. So, having students go back to look at primary sources and contemplate like what happened, like why the change. So the school became co-ed in 1986 due to Title IX.
Explain to our audience.
So basically, like the government determined that there needs to be equal opportunity for men and women in education, and so like we often think about that through the lens of sports, right? Mm-hmm. But in New York City public schools, it was these schools that were gender specific to integrate them. So that happened. It's interesting because it took 4 more years until you would see boys in the yearbooks, because it would be 4 years until they graduate. And then it was still like predominantly female, but then it equalized over time. But it's interesting now because there's now 6 schools in the building. So now the building's called Washington Irving Campus. There's 6 different schools. And so our school, which has a focus on career and technical education, very similar to the premise of Washington Irving High School back in the day. Students get to take classes in dental technology and pharmacy technology.
So that is wonderful, because I think of that as historic as well, because in the beginning of our country there were apprenticeships.
Yeah.
People learned a craft. They learned. I mean, we talk about that. We were talking about that. I'm on a commission of women. You know, women used to learn how to sew and take care of themselves, and we've kind of lost that basic how to survive, those survival skills.
Yeah.
You know how to. But beyond that, you know, to learn a craft in school, because in the beginning of our country, it was. They were 12, 13, 14, 15, and they learned in their father's footsteps or their mother's footsteps how they could go out and then have a career. So I think these kind of schools are fabulous.
The premise of the school, so the founding principal, Marianne Mead, you can listen to a transcript of her speaking on this WNYC radio show. And she talked about the fact that public schools need to break away from academia, and they have to learn how to solve the real life problems of like the living boy and girl. And that this school is meant to be a composite school where students could get vocational training, but they will also get exposure to liberal arts and learn about the culture of the country that they are living in. And there needs to be an emphasis on patriotism and civic engagement.
Well, I think that's the wave of the future, don't you? More and more schools are going to start doing it.
I mean, definitely, very much so. I mean, it's amazing to think, you know, that was the mission of our school back in 1913. And then when you look at our school now, again, it's a career and technical education school. So students are either taking classes in dental technology, pharmacy technology, but then also there's a renewed emphasis on civic engagement. So
that's nice. That's nice that there's a renewed emphasis on civic engagement. That's not happening everywhere.
Learning democracy by doing democracy.
Is that the quote?
It's a great quote. It's a meaningful quote, and it's worth sharing. But I mean,
is that your quote?
No,
I like
it's not.
So it's learning democracy by
doing democracy.
Okay, learning democracy by doing democracy.
But you know, I'm happy. It puts things into perspective. But I mean, if you look at our Supreme Court over the past 20, 30 years, like I feel like the best quotes on like the purpose of education and civic engagement has come from the Supreme Court. So you have like Stephen Breyer, who said schools should be nurseries and incubators of democracy. And I couldn't agree with that more. And you also have a quote coming from another Supreme Court justice that said that schools need to be marketplaces of learning and the marketplaces of ideas, right? So you often think about capitalism and markets, but like schools need to be a marketplace for ideas. Like people need to be sharing multiple perspectives, and they should feel comfortable doing that. There needs to be civil discourse that's had between students. And all these things are very, very challenging, especially now when, you know, people are so polarized and divided and echo chambered and nobody wants to listen to one another. But that's why schools exist, is to have those conversations and those experiences.
Yeah, and I would think that we failed on this much in our trajectory, you know, of enlightenment in our country. But I think that there have been certainly pockets of great examples of tolerance, you know, coming together to debate and hearing both sides. And as I said, we have failed on that, and we've picked ourselves up and we try to be better. You know what I mean? But there seems to be, I heard someone say recently that in education that tolerance used to be taught in the classroom, and now that's kind of fallen by the wayside. But I think what you're talking about is tolerance to have a marketplace of ideas. If everyone has the same idea, you're not exhibiting any tolerance of hearing, and that's how you grow and learn enlightenment And that's really, wouldn't you say that's maybe an exceptional American quality, is the ability to
Of course.
have a marketplace of ideas?
I mean, I think for me, when I think about American exceptionalism, the first thing that comes to mind is public schools in general. Mm-hmm. And so when I got off the plane this morning, the first place that I went, which I knew about, which I always wanted to see, was the Boston Latin School, which is on School Street. It's just a few miles from here. It opened in 1635. It's the first public school in the United States of America.
Really? I didn't even know that. 1635.
So although like I view, I teach at a historic school, the same school that my grandmother went to, opened in 1913 before women's suffrage was passed. Nevertheless, there was a school just a few miles from here that opened in 1635.
And what was the name of that school?
That was the Boston Latin School.
Boston Latin School. Yeah. Where is it? I want to go.
On School Street.
Okay,
it's
I think I may have seen
23 School Street. So
yes.
There's two historical markers up, and the National Park Service, they have like a website, and I think they've landmarked the site as well.
Yes, I do believe I have seen that.
So
that's really So that's an American. And John Adams he's from Massachusetts, and he believed that education was the core of even preserving a democracy.
So I think like when people think about American exceptionalism, I think some people shy away from that term because they see it as competitive and hierarchical in terms of placing America compared to like other countries. But I don't see it that way. I don't think it's something that people should shy away from. I think it's important for people to think about like, what is America? And what do you think is special about America? And I mean, if you look back at public schooling, I think like ancient China can claim that they first had the first public schools. Mm-hmm. But, comparatively, 1635 was prior to most countries in Europe in terms of them implementing public schooling. But again, it's not a competition. It's just something to be proud of, right? It's something to be proud of. And so for me, public schools is top of the list in terms of what makes America exceptional. Mm-hmm. And that's why I've been, super, super proud to kind of rediscover the hidden history of our school that has been ignored. And this happened during the pandemic, or shortly after when kids returned to our building. Our custodial staff unearthed all these old artifacts and documents that I don't know what they would have been done with, but I put them in the hands of students, and we've created a school history exhibition that illustrates the whole history of our school and how it connects to patriotism and civic engagement going back to 1913.
That's wonderful, because then there's a sense of pride with that too. And I agree with you. We're not looking to say we're better than anybody else, but what are the special cultural components or just what are the aspects? Because culturally you were talking about that too as one of your metrics. What is it about America that is good? You know what I mean? That is good. Yeah. Because I think that's been dropped from the narrative a little bit. And I don't want to. My goal with this is it's not superficial. We're going to actually ground it in things that are tangible.
It's a great question. I think I would encourage educators to pose it to their students, and for people to be open and receptive to thinking about what that means. And so I do remember, now I remember my whole list. I have my 4.
Oh, you have your 4. Okay. Well, I wanted to touch on your lesson plan, your lesson plan was a winning lesson plan with Constituting America. And you talked about the Supreme Court and the Bill of Rights. You were kind of putting that together in your lesson plan. So I thought it'd be interesting, since that's one of the things you focus on, to talk about how you view perhaps that branch of government, the Supreme Court, and of course the Bill of Rights is in our Constitution, how that is exceptional, or do you believe it is?
I mean, I think it's exceptional when you read Federalist 78, where Alexander Hamilton argues that you shouldn't fear the Supreme Court because it doesn't have teeth and it's somewhat powerless. And I think it's interesting. I think it's remarkable that America has the oldest still in use Constitution and the shortest still in use Constitution. And it's fun to, every year I get Declarations of Independence and Constitutions that I hand out to my students. And the first lesson is like, describe this document. Like, most students are expecting the Constitution to be much more verbose and longer. And it's like, to physically see it, and it's like it easily fits in your pocket. It's smaller than an iPhone. I think is really meaningful for students. And like, if you open up to Article 3, it's a paragraph, right? The Supreme Court is basically a paragraph, and there was a lot of uncertainty about what the Supreme Court was, what its power was. It's unique because the Supreme Court's like the only branch that really defined its own power. In Marbury versus Madison, they're like, we have, it was a very interesting maneuver when there was a shift in political parties, and they were like, you know what, it's like, we're going to say, like, we don't have standing in this case, but in the side view, we have this power of judicial review, which was created by the court itself. So I think that's really interesting.
Check. I think it's the check and balance. We tend to give the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment so much weight, but if we don't have the check of balance, then the power will come in, authoritarianism, whatever, tyranny, and that will disappear in a second.
Yeah,
so that check of the Supreme Court on the legislative branch and legislative branch on the executive branch and all of that check is I'm just so fascinated.
I would say federalism is the biggest check on government power.
Yes. The states and the local governments.
And so, and students need to contemplate that. Often when you ask students, like, where is government? What is government? They'll say DC, right? And we really have to go over it. It's like, no, we have like 3 levels of government, right? And I ask students, it's like, if we want to visit our local government, our city government, where are we going? What field trip are we going on? Like, we're going to City Hall, right? We're going to see City Council. And if we want to visit our state government, where are we going? And these are questions I constantly drill them, like, what level of, like, whenever we read an article, whenever we see like a piece of legislation, what level of government, what branch of government is this? It's really important for students to contemplate that.
And that every state government, according to the Constitution, has to be a republic, so that it's a matching government. But we talk a lot about federalism at Constituting America, but that is so true. It's this local government. I love talking to the students about your representative in the House. It's not the president. There's so much emphasis on the president, but your representative is in your neighborhood, and that's the person that can help you. So that's, but it's true, the state and the city government, that's really, I want to go back to the education. I thought it was interesting too. In so many other countries at the time when we were having our first public schools, the majority of populaces in Europe weren't even allowed to be educated. Because the kings were educated and whatnot, and they didn't even have schools, as you were saying. That was really unique at the time over here to make sure that everybody had an education.
Yeah, I mean, and very much so. And it's also interesting to look at the history of integration of schools, because in some respects, like in New York, that was done entirely voluntarily. And it's interesting, like, to see, especially even on certain mainstream TV shows. So there's a show called The Gilded Age on HBO, and so there's a character, first Black principal in New York City. She's a character on the show, and she talks about the struggle of, like, keeping her school open, keeping it integrated, and she was also a suffragette. And my students actually just led a walking tour around the neighborhood surrounding our school about New York City-centric activists and sites in New York City connected to their activism. Mm-hmm. And I think, like, part of civic engagement as well is, like, knowing the history of your neighborhood. Which
is a form of federalism.
It's easy to do that in New York City.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to do that in Boston. But even regardless of where you are, there's street names, and those names are derived from something, and they connect back to the history of that place. And so, like, it's a meaningful thing for students to think about that.
It is. I love to go to local museums. I live in a very small town. There's a little local museum. You can learn about the neighborhood. I think that's really, really true. Okay, so we've touched on the history of the school and in school. We've touched on the Supreme Court and the Bill of Rights and whatnot. But you have 3 others on your list of American exceptionalism.
Some of which we already talked about. I mean, so the first one was public schooling. The second one was the U.S. Constitution for its flexibility, right, and its ability to change. And so I think creating a document initially with the mindset of there being an amendment process.
Oh, I was just going to say that. Yeah, I was thinking, where can I fit this in? That's the greatest check of all. And I don't think our Constitution would still be in existence if we didn't have the amendment process. That was brilliant, was it not? I think that was an exceptional thought to think, here is this document, but we know we're going to give people the foundation. We know there's so many changes that need to be made. Ideas such as slavery, they couldn't even agree on at the time. So we're going to give you this amendment process to go to like the steamer, but you had a little escape valve. We're going to give you these amendments so you can go change and craft this document, but we don't have to lose the core of the things that we know are really, that we think are solid. So I think not only do we have the amendment process, we have 2 ways to amend it. Most of them, all of them so far have been through Congress. But if Congress doesn't want to reduce their salaries or keep a check on their salaries, if Congress doesn't want to limit their terms, we can do it through a state's calling a convention to ratify, to amend the Constitution.
And my students, what resonates with them,
that's a great check. That's a great check.
The amendment that resonates with them the most, I would say. Well, I don't want to be dismissive of other amendments,
right.
But the 26th Amendment is the fact that it gave 18. It lowered the voting age from 21 to 18.
Yes.
And I have students that feel strongly that they feel like the voting age should be even lowered.
Right.
Like it should be lower. It should be 16. And we talk about regardless of that, what are the things in your power that you do have control over, that's in your locus of control, that you can, other ways that you can bring change. Last week, my students voted in our city-based participatory budgeting program. So we do that at school. We do participatory budgeting on multiple levels. Like at our school, every year, our school gets $4,000 and students craft proposals on how that money should be spent to better our school.
Excellent.
And then they vote on them, and they have that experience. And we use ranked choice voting to determine the winning proposal, and then it gets implemented, and they help us with the implementation too.
The execution of it. So you got the legislation, you got legislative
learning
branch,
democracy by doing democracy. Yeah. And then we do it because in New York City it exists. City Council does it, and the Civic Engagement Commission does it as well, and they get to be involved in the same process for their borough and their city council district as well. And then they get involved in canvassing, and all of those various experiences in terms of voting. It's open to any New Yorker 12 and up. So it's accessible to them, and they have experiences.
That's good because they can learn it and kind of absorb it at a young age and learn the process. And I think that's so incredibly important to be involved. So many schools, not yours, obviously, but it's like, here's the worksheet, and this is what the government does. This is what they do up there. They have this branch, and they don't say, well, actually, it's we the people. We're the government.
There's so many things that need to be changed in their own school, right?
Mm-hmm. But that's a good way to learn the process.
Completely, yeah. And there's implications too to other levels of government. So, there's all sorts of things that students are experiencing at school, whether it's standardized testing, whether it's environmental issues, pollution. It's like, well, there's both city, state, and federal laws that are influencing these things. And in some respects, for students to make the connection of, well, most of what you're experiencing in school, it would be stemming from the state level of government. Mm-hmm. And for students to realize that.
Yes, they expect so much to come from the national government, but really they're limited in a lot of ways.
You can tie, public schooling directly back to the 10th Amendment in terms of, it's reserved, it's power reserved to the states.
Yes, exactly. So I think maybe there's a thought process here that one of the things that's exceptional about our Constitution is the amendment process.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's number 3 on your list?
Number 3, we talked about a bit already, but that was diversity, diversity and multiculturalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something that sets America apart, and it's something that makes America stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing to look at our school student body today and like how many languages are spoken, how many countries are represented, but at the same time, like I can have my students do that by looking at the history of our school and see same thing, like where were students coming from, and at the same time to appreciate both like our shared culture, right? What makes us Americans, what makes us New Yorkers, right? There's shared experiences there, but also what makes us unique.
We can talk about that because it's everybody. Why do we expect everybody to think the same on one hand, right? Because we come from such different cultures, we bring different thought processes and ideas. So to think that everything should be an echo chamber when everyone has a different perspective and background of life and they're coming from all over the world, to be American. And then on the flip side, there's the tolerance of other people's idea. Well, I guess that would go hand in hand, right? With tolerance, I would say
not just tolerance, but like appreciation, curiosity, and appreciation, and so
respect.
Of course,
yeah,
of course. One of the nicest things about remote learning, and I haven't tried to do this since, and it's a goal of mine, is we would have virtual show and tells, and one of the nice things was we were learning from each other's homes, and so there's a lot of like meaningful artifacts within your home that you could share with your classmates. It was the only way that I could get students to turn their camera on.
Understanding, would that not be understanding? It's like, this is a culture, but now you need to understand my culture, so that'd be part of showing.
And to be aware of like, what's your story of self? Like, what's your family's journey? What's your journey? If you had to pick one artifact, like a specific object in your house that tells the story.
And so what did they
of
say?
your family.
What were some of the things that they showed?
I had students that made food and prepare, and which was like heartbreaking because we weren't in person and couldn't actually eat it with one another.
Yeah.
Clothing, but I think like some of the most heartfelt ones had to do with like photo albums, and one student had a diary that her mother wrote while she was pregnant, and talking about like life in Mexico, and it was just really, really heartwarming. And then I use that as an opportunity too to share a little bit about my family story. Like I introduced them to my grandma Anna, who went to Washington Irving High School, right? So they've already been kind of introduced to her, and then I share that shortly after she graduated. In 1935, she met my grandfather, George, who was an immigrant from Poland, who came to the United States to escape persecution as a Jew living in Poland, and he was fortunate to escape the Holocaust, and the rest of his family wasn't as lucky, and he had one other sibling who survived, but the rest of his brothers and sisters were murdered in Poland.
Wow. How did he escape that?
He came to the United States.
I mean, how did he get out?
I'm at that point. I think he had paperwork and immigration quotas at that point were limited, and it was feasible.
And so did he travel by himself then over here? It was very brave.
Yeah.
Very brave.
And another interesting thing.
And then he just arrived in New York City?
He arrived in New York City
all by himself. How old was he?
It's an exceptional story, but at the same time it was a common story. Mm-hmm. And you can say it's still a common familiar story.
But there's an exceptionalism to that too,
of
though,
course.
right? You're not born French and you raised French and you stay French. I mean, so many people. What is America, right? I had a friend of mine who's Russian. And I said, "Oh, America." He said, "What's America?" You know what I mean? But America is this commonality of everyone who, at some point in their heritage, has come over as an 18-year-old or whatever choice they made and landed here.
It's a story that my students could relate to, coming from different places. But again, like the push and pull experiences that people have with their country of origin and the pull to America, and in terms of your experiences coming here, working your way up, finding a job, finding a place to live, making a life for yourself, making a family. He took night classes to learn English, not at Washington Irving High School, but like at the school that was very, very common. They had general language classes for people that were learning English. We still offer the same. We still offer very similar classes.
And that's the richness. That's great that you do. That's the richness of everyone bringing their own cultures to this new land. To come over here, and the people that were here obviously before the Native Americans. But it's like everyone coming and bringing their richness of heritage. I think makes us exceptional, wouldn't you say? But in order to have that unity, we have to be tolerant of each other.
Of course, but I like
how you took a deeper understanding of each other.
I think that connects to public schools, and there's great buzzwords in education now, but in some respects, like, it could be explained a lot simpler. But like, one of the terms is like culturally responsive and sustaining education, or like social emotional learning, and it's like, okay, well, what is that? It's like, well, people should talk about like their family stories and where they come from, and they should be willing to listen to one another and learn from one another and be curious about people's experiences, and look for commonalities, and also look for unique and interesting differences. And I think that's important. I feel like sometimes when certain approaches to education, when they get a specific name, they get compartmentalized into a box, and it's just like, it becomes very bureaucratic. Like, check it off, like check that off. Right. Like, did you talk? But what schools need to do is they need to figure out unique and meaningful ways for students and also staff and other adults, other people from the communities, to like connect to one another, to really like form connections. Schools are communities. They're the most important communities that I think that we have, and they've always been. They've always been. And
to have a wonderful teacher as exceptional as you is really, really a gift for the students, because think of the power of the school, right? And shaping future citizens, future, individuals, personalities.
Well, I mean, this is why I became a teacher, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to develop the courage and the experience to be able to do these things. But I feel like for the most part, it's why people get into teaching, and so I think it's really, really important to let teachers be professionals, let them be creative, and let them seek out the most meaningful and unique opportunities for students to like contribute to that community and to connect to one another.
I'm sitting here today as the founder of Constituting America and doing all of this, because of my 5th grade teacher. Mr. Ingram was my first year at the school. It was a little country school. There were cows in the backyard, and I would moved from Euless to Fort Worth. And Mr. Ingram, it was his first year as well, and he spent the entire year teaching us about the Revolutionary era, putting on the play 1776. So we rehearsed it all year for the big performance in May. So he integrated music and a musical with the learning of the actual factual, academic aspects. But the marriage of those two things, set me ablaze with love of John Adams and the founding father, the Declaration of Independence. So teachers have incredible influence and on their students.
It's a wonderful thing that you had that experience in elementary school, And I mean, that's what I want for all my students. I mean, students everywhere, but
Fifth grade, yeah.
But in particular, my students, when they graduate, I want them not just talking about what they know, what they've done. What have I done to make this school a more inclusive place? What have I done to elevate student voice? One of my students just texted me a photo on Thursday in the cafeteria. There was a sign that said "Halal food coming," and so this student and some of her classmates have been working together to think about how could we improve school food, and they were looking at the fact that New York City Public Schools has a student Bill of Rights, but there's no food-related language in it. And so they came up with a demands in terms of what should be added.
They wrote a petition.
They sure did. It's on change.org. You can go see it. I know that was something that we've worked together on.
Right.
Formed a petition, but also sought out what are the opportunities, resources that perhaps not even like most school administrators are paying attention to, especially in a large school system, right? And bringing those ideas and proposals to our school administrators and working together to implement change that is meaningful and will, improve.
They have a
improve their life.
voice. They have a voice. That would. I think you're touching on two things that I think are also exceptional about our country is service. There seems to be kind of a service mentality, but the other is the voice that everyone. I feel when I go into all these schools that a lot of students may feel that their life is maybe hopeless, right? And I think this is why a lot of people come here because they live in countries where they have no voice. They have no hope. They don't feel there can ever be any change. And so when I look at some students and they just seem depressed or down, or they feel like there's no hope in their situation, well, I think that this country is obviously a beacon of hope. We're not perfect by any means, right? But we try to get there. But the Constitution gives you a voice. Hopefully.
And
right?
school should
but you need to know how to utilize
as
it.
well. I think, and it connects back like, what is my school doing now? And what was the school doing when it first opened?
So history.
In 1913.
You're talking about how important history is.
So it's the two things. So what the two things that students need is they will care about their education if they see the purpose in it. And I think for many students, that's vocationally. I mean, I've worked at other schools where I've had students that said, "Miss, I can get good grades. That doesn't mean anything. Like my cousin got good grades and he's unemployed and he's, what is he doing with his life?" So the premise of our school is giving students options, paid internships their senior year. If they choose to go on to higher education, they could work part-time. They can make double, triple minimum wage because they're leaving our school with specific technical skills and credentials.
I think it's the wave of the future. I really think it's the wave of the future. And it's long due.
Yeah, I mean, America has done this before. I mean,
But we need to bring it back.
I can go to the archives of our school and I have lists of students, what jobs that they had connected to like their learning in school and how much they were getting paid. Like, I mean, vocational, apprentice-based teaching and learning is nothing new, but yeah, it diminished and it's being rebuilt, thankfully, along with civic education. So those are the two things. Students need to graduate feeling I have a career path and
Purpose.
So a professional purpose, and I also have a voice.
Yeah.
And
a service to the country.
And it's interesting
Which then also service for yourself.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because you shared about your fifth grade experience and how that put you on this path and this journey into constituting America. For me, I didn't experience that in elementary, middle school, or high school, or college. For me, it was after I graduated college and I worked for a year, I joined AmeriCorps, the Domestic Peace Corps. And I spent a year traveling around the country doing service projects, but not just service. It was like really service learning. I was learning skills. I was learning how to impact and be an agent of change. But in the process of that, I was running educational youth programs for refugees in Minneapolis. I helped build homes for people with Habitat for Humanity. My last project was actually something called Civic Troop, where I traveled to school districts all around Colorado, teaching about civic engagement and 4 influential women in American history. And so we did our assembly, right? We put on our play, and then we talked to students afterwards about what they can do for their communities, how they can bring change to their communities. And so it's interesting because I kind of feel like that's what I do now, just like not in costume. Sometimes in costume, sometimes I dress up.
Right.
But I kind of feel like that put me on the path. That was my last project in AmeriCorps, and that's kind of, after that I realized I want to be a teacher.
I admire that. That's really great. The Peace Corps. Was the Peace Corps created or Kennedy?
So,
I think the Peace Corps was in the 60s?
So Peace Corps was created by Kennedy actually on the steps of the Michigan Union, which is where I went to college. And so I remember walking up those steps and like seeing, always read the plaque.
Yeah.
You'll learn a lot about history.
Yes, I love historical monuments.
Always read the plaque. So I read the plaque and I'm like, and I had this connection to Peace Corps. And then I think it was the Clinton administration that established AmeriCorps.
Okay.
But funding wasn't always just like everything, just like in government, like people have to raise their voice, they have to express their thoughts, and they have to pursue activism for what they want. So after I finished the program, I actually got a call from my representative in Congress, Carolyn McCarthy at the time, and she invited me to Washington, D.C. to speak at a subcommittee hearing on education and workforce about AmeriCorps and service, like service learning in America.
Right.
And I got to speak about my experiences in the program, how it was so influential, how it put me on this path to becoming a teacher, the work that I did, how it was connected, I think, to all the things: public schooling, government, immigration, diversity, like literally everything that we just talked about. Like I shared those experiences and how I benefited from that through AmeriCorps, and I got to advocate for them renewing the program, which
Good for you.
And it got approved, and it's still.
Look how exceptional you are.
So I mean, I share that with students. It's like,
Well, do you think that's an American exceptionalism quality? Is this sort of inherent quality of being of service? Helping others, like making the world a better place. And maybe, do you think we've lost that a little bit?
In different ways.
Me-centric instead of having what can I do to make someone else's life better? How can I be of service to country, but also to my neighbor? And
I think that happens
nature.
all over the world.
It was there in the beginning so much in our country because everyone had to survive, right? Whether you were surviving in a city or you're surviving on pioneer days or whatever your culture was, everyone just had to survive, right? It's like, so there's like a survival mechanism, but there was also a sense of community. We're back kind of to community, but being of service. I mean, would you do you think we're losing that?
I think that's something that
me-centric?
Yes, definitely, very much so. But I think acts of service occur everywhere, across the world.
Mm-hmm. A lot of times it's based in faith.
In schools as well, all across the world, but it looks different. So one of the things that I've been fortunate enough to do is I've been able to visit schools in Germany. I've been able to visit schools in Japan. I've been able to visit schools in China. I've been able to visit schools in India, which is the largest and one of the newest democracies in the world. Mm-hmm. And so there's things I've seen in all these places that inspire me, and I'm like, wow, we have a need for that in America. We have a need for that in my school. Mm-hmm. For instance, in India, Indian schools, every school day begins with something called morning assembly. You have the whole school that stands outside, and they go through, they do prayers, they do yoga and meditation, they talk about the news.
Where is this?
In India.
Mm-hmm. Interesting they have prayers.
So
Are they a specific prayer? Or like a
so this is the
generic
thing.
prayer?
Their understanding of pluralism, right, is that they do multiple prayers. They do Christian, Islam, and Hindu prayers.
Interesting. In India, in the morning, they do different prayers. I thought that would be something we could incorporate into our schools. It's like pray to whomever your First Amendment right choice of religion is, but let's at least have it,
So this is something that is also completely, entirely facilitated by students. The student body elects a morning assembly leader.
At your school?
No, this is in India.
Oh,
okay. And that morning assembly leader then mobilizes other students, and there's an expectation that throughout the whole school year, by the end of the school year, every student has participated in morning assembly in some way, shape, or form. They've done something to contribute and facilitate as part of that. Now, I think that is something that is desperately needed in schools in the United States.
What aspect of that?
A sense of community. Like a sense of community. And
Of being of service to somebody else.
yeah, and really...
Something higher than yourself. Kennedy said it, think not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Preparing yourself for learning, right? Preparing yourself for learning. So some of it's mindfulness, and mindfulness and community. And in India, that exists. That exists in a way that I have not seen in the US. Now, in their classes...
Mindfulness being, I'm sorry to interrupt, but being along the prayer aspect. But so you could go, my idea is you can go to a room and just breathe deeply if you want to, right? Go meditate. Or you can go to whatever your faith is, but just there needs to be kind of a sense of mindfulness, a sense of something other outside of ourselves that we're living for. I just think it's existed in our country, but I think we've kind of lost it in our country. We need to get it back.
There's quotes like, I mean, if you go to schools in India where it says like all learning is derived from the soul. And
we certainly don't teach that.
but it's interesting.
What do we say here? I don't know.
So the view of being like secular in India is a view of pluralism. In America, inclusiveness, and we celebrate everybody's culture and religion.
Yeah.
And in America, we have a much different take on what secular is. Separate.
Yeah.
Separate.
I think we're missing that. Yeah. Well, so let's go back to your fourth. I think that would be good to integrate that back into our country. So that's just interesting. I would love to spend more time on that, the pluralism and how we separate it, but they integrate it. The
school, I worked at a school in Kerala, in Malappuram city, and you'd walk around and there was religious artifacts all over the school, but it was everything.
Where was this?
This was a public school in India.
Oh, back in India.
In the state of Kerala.
Right.
And, there was Christian, Hindu, Islamic, imagery and quotation that was all over the school. So religion wasn't hidden. Yeah. It was embraced, and it was used. It was used in some respects as like a unifying force, like in terms of like we're going to celebrate and expose people, as opposed to like compartmentalizing it and hiding it from school. In public schools in India do the complete opposite. It's completely embraced.
Really, really something that is fascinating that we should explore. Okay, fourth exceptionalism in our last 10 minutes. You said you had a fourth one that you forgot, but then you remembered.
So what did we talk about? We talked about public schools. We talked about the U.S. Constitution being adaptable and flexible. We talked about immigration and diversity.
Culture.
Right? I mean, in some respects, I think American culture has had a huge effect on the world and has been embraced in many unique or meaningful ways. And so I think that's something that is special and unique about America.
What aspects of that culture?
I'm trying to think of a good example for that one.
I know. Well, it's okay. You don't have to.
I feel like might be the one I have the least to talk about.
That's okay.
Well,
I think we've kind of touched on it, really. I mean, I think, how would we define the American culture? It's in its purest, best form. You know, American culture has always been to strive and thrive and help and community. I mean, I think that we've been benevolent to a certain extent, though we have failed. So you hate saying anything like that in this day and age. But I mean, in the best, if you could encapsulize the best parts of America, we're pretty benevolent.
One thing that is really interesting to kind of connect back to what we were talking about before is one thing that was most striking to me on the entrance of the school that I was working at in India was a big portrait and quotation from Abraham Lincoln, which was just shocking to me. And I have a picture of myself and my host teacher, Thomas, who was also another social studies educator. By the way, have spoken to him through Zoom. I did this fellowship and I taught in India, I think 4 or 5 years ago. And every month since, I've maintained a relationship and have talked to him on the phone. And we've learned so much about each other, about our countries, our similarities, differences, schooling in India versus the United States. Like, we've derived so much inspiration from one another. But, I was just so taken. I have that picture.
What was the quote?
I don't want to misquote it. I have the picture. I have it hanging up in my classroom.
Uh-huh.
I have it hanging.
Is the quote with it?
With the quote.
Okay, so just take a picture of it.
I think it has to do, I'm trying to remember, I think it's Lincoln's second inaugural address. And I'm hoping it is because it's a document that I spent a lot of time talking about with my students. We read, one of the things that my students love to read is presidential inaugural addresses. I think you can learn so much. But Lincoln's, I think, is most unique if you read his first inaugural address and then you compare it to his second. Because in the first...
And how he grew.
Exactly, yeah. In the first inaugural address, it's basically a threat. And it's basically like, if we go down this path of civil war, like, the blood is on your hands, South. Like, you have this choice to make. And it's amazing to think in the second inaugural address, after the bloodiest war in American history, his language and tone completely changes. And he says, this is all our burden to bear due to the sin of slavery, which we are all responsible for. And the quote of malice towards none, charity for all, bind up the wounds of this country, let's move on. I think is something that should resonate and people should contemplate a little bit more.
Well said. And I think that you're exceptional. I really do. And I love hearing about how you have visited your service in AmeriCorps, and your service to your students, but the service, the richness that you bring to your students with your love of history and country, but also what you've learned in the other countries and the other cultures, and how you've been able to say, we do this better perhaps, but look what they do, and we could maybe, but that's to me what America's about, because all these people have moved to this country and we have such a richness we can share with one another if we'll just do it.
And I think that's what school should be, is what I want more than anything is for my students to have similar experiences and for their learning to extend beyond the classroom, for it to be real, for it to have implications. And so, I'm excited as my students' final project in school before the end of the school year, they need to complete a Constituting America project.
Oh, yay!
And I tell them, I'm like, look, it's one thing for you to do a project and it'd go up on a bulletin board or it'd be in this classroom and and that's it. It doesn't get in the hands of anyone else. And it's like, that is not what school is about. School should be a real place of creation where what you're working on has implications beyond your school. And so the sheer fact, you can create a project that could potentially be shared with people all over the country, right? That will be seen, listened to, heard by people all over the country. Like, that's what we should be doing. We should be like supporting students in creating and being change makers and thinking beyond their classrooms.
And thinking beyond themselves.
Mm-hmm. And thinking beyond themselves.
Yeah. Wonderful. You're exceptional. Your students are very lucky. And we're very lucky that you sat down here with us today. And I really, really mean that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. You're awesome.
Yeah.